Huge problems for America's truck manufacturers after years of price gouging catches up to them, folks. Ford moving towards a non-negotiated price and 100% transparent and online shopping and buying format, 100% pickup and delivery model that eliminates dealerships altogether.
I believe that we have to go to a non-negotiated price, totally online, transparent, 100% pickup and delivery model.
Bad news for service and bad news for employment, because you got to think, if Ford eliminates the ability for dealerships to sell new Ford products, new Ford vehicles, trucks, cars, EVs, whatever it may be, then the dealerships will ultimately go away. I mean, what would be their purpose? Granted, they would still have the ability to potentially trade and sell and resell used cars and trucks and vehicles and potentially make money on service, but without the brand behind them for new vehicles, what would be the incentive? We could see the potential change and shift in dealerships as we have known them here drastically moving forward in the future, which I would expect to see happening. And if that were the case, then obviously there would be a huge change and shift in employment, because more than likely they wouldn't need as many salespeople. And these salespeople could essentially be replaced by automation, AI, ChatGPT, OpenAI, Bard, other ways of conducting sales and helping customers online without actually being physically in front of them. But years ago, folks, you could buy a brand new vehicle from dealerships at prices below MSRP. Comment down below and let me know if you remember such times. And this was without any problem whatsoever. They were begging customers to come in and throwing incentives and discounts and savings at them. Those days are long gone. And try that today and you will likely be thrown out of the dealership and laughed at in the process. But that may not be the case much longer. And hear me out. As banks are starting to pull back, dealers are having their feet held to the fire, and the repo trucks are coming. They're warming up the engines, folks. They are going to be lining up if payments aren't made immediately. Allow me to explain. Stick with me here. We got a lot to cover in this video. And these repossessions hitting news headlines are not from individual consumers, as the mainstream media would want you to believe. No, instead, these folks losing their rides, these aren't going to be the average consumers, the individuals after having missed a few missed payments. Nope, the dealerships are the ones who are going to be in big trouble now. Stay tuned, especially if you own a dealership, know anybody who does, and or works at a dealership. This is going to be very, very important. Ford, Ram, Stellantis, Chrysler, GM, Jeep, it doesn't matter. They are all guilty of raising the prices on their vehicles, and now we're starting to see the dealerships fill up with inventory that is just not selling, or at least not like it used to. The days of the fear of missing out, the FOMO, and overpaying and buying up vehicles left and right, and crazy lending practices that ultimately was allowing people the opportunity to buy vehicles that they really couldn't afford, it's pretty much over, folks. Pandemic hype and supply chain shortages drove prices up. We saw that way up, and the dealerships are now holding their vehicles hostage at higher prices until they sell before purchasing more. And this is causing manufacturers like Ford, GM, Stellantis, all of them to all pull back on production, but not lower prices. Now that's huge, folks, because we know the current state of the economy and the pain that people are feeling left and right with inflation, higher prices, job loss, layoff, other negative impacts to their income and their financing and their savings and their credit. General Motors CEO Mary Barra pulled back on production to try and create a shortage to drive up demand. All instead of actually just, maybe meeting the needs of your target market, your customers, and lowering the prices, perhaps potentially moving more units, selling on volume and making your money that way. But instead, no, let's pull back on supply and try to drive up demand. Does that sound familiar? Now, customers or consumers are not happy because they're not really customers if they're not buying. And they are downright angry and pushing back on these markups. And this is pushing buyers to ditch brand loyalty and only focus on the lowest priced options available, or even worse, holding back on their old cars and trucks and just not buying any new ones. And despite Ford and GM claiming that they would punish dealers for grossly overpricing these vehicles and adding insane ADM or additional dealer markup over sticker, nothing has really happened besides just talk for the press releases and to try and save face with the consumer for the sake of the brand. And instead, to make matters worse, Ford and GM just raised their MSRPs. For what reason? To help soften the blow to dealers on these markups. So think about it like this. Instead of the dealerships getting a black eye and a bad reputation, and also proving the point of which the fact that these manufacturers, GM, Ford, Stellantis, Chrysler, Jeep, whomever it may be, isn't actually doing anything about them adding these markups to their vehicles, what they did instead was they raised the MSRP of these vehicles, which allows the dealership to in turn make more money as they are making a percentage of margin on the sale. You see what I'm saying? So in essence, the same end result happens. The consumer pays more and the dealership makes more. But also, more importantly, the manufacturer makes more too in the process, because realistically, they were more bummed out and butthurt about not making the extra money when the dealerships were than anything else. And instead, to make matters worse, Ford and GM just raised their MSRPs to help soften the blow to dealers on these markups so that they will continue to make more money and the consumers will be less upset over the added fees, but still paying 30 to 40 to almost 50% more for a new car or truck today when compared to just a few years ago. Now, I did the math on a 2017 Ford F-250 Lariat, pretty much maxed out. Everything you could have possibly wanted, and even had the better gearing and the beefed up suspension of a 350, and that thing was a beast. And in comparison to today, a 2022 or 2023 comparable model was roughly 40% more for the same truck used. I mean, it's crazy. It's unbelievable, but we're starting to see pushback. And these are just a sign of the times, folks. And it's only going to continue to get worse moving forward. For some, it'll be better for others, but in the meantime, it's going to get worse for some. Stick with me here. So there are so many factors at play here that make it such a bad move overall, because now we have the added burden of higher interest rates and lower tax return check amounts, okay? And it is sure to cause a massive shit show in the automotive car market industry for manufacturers, dealers, and the banks and lenders. Okay. Now, I would be willing to bet that we will see a large percentage of dealerships that won't survive the next few months or through the end of the year. And we have already seen it happen just a few weeks ago. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'll put up a video on the screen. I'll put a little screenshot so you guys can see. I covered a dealership that actually closed down multiple locations around the country abruptly, but there's a reason behind it. So check it out. You'll understand. But the pain, folks, the panic, the worry, the fear, the crisis is coming for the dealerships, for the employees, and possibly for the banks. Now, they are trying to justify these costs, folks, or at least the manufacturers are, with added tech and a buttload of options that nobody really cares to have, want, or really need. And they are becoming overcomplicated tech centers on wheels instead of just making quality cars at prices that people can afford. Take a look around. I noticed this just the other day that dealerships lots are starting to fill up again. And with new vehicles, not a pile of pre-owned, new vehicles for sale. And that is clearly a sign of the times and the shift that the economy and consumer is making right now. And that shift is that there was a time where people were overpaying and pre-ordering new cars. Now, granted, there are still some out there that command a premium. For instance, a C8 Corvette Z06, maybe even the new Nissan Z. There's a few out there that have a lot of hype around them that are actually here or coming that people are going to continuously spend a lot of money on to say that they have theirs first. Look, to each their own. And for some, there is a strategic reason behind it that actually works out for them and allows them to make more money. Now, granted, Stradman isn't one of them, because from what I saw, he didn't really make a lot of money when he sold his Z06, C8 Z06. But we have to realize how much money he actually made by having it to be able to make content for his channel before selling it. Because not every transaction is black and white and clearly apparent as to the reasoning behind and the ways of which people actually produce their money. For instance, think about it. A lot of YouTubers make a lot of money creating content and they don't get a lot of views. Think about that. So there are some vehicles that are going to command a premium that people are going to continuously overpay for. But moving forward, I bet they're probably going to have a tougher time, a harder time acquiring these vehicles, especially if they need funding, financing, loans, and lending. And beyond that, they're probably going to have a hard time selling them and even getting anywhere close to what they paid for it. And probably are going to be taking a bath on them. And some of them are even getting these contracts written up where they're not actually allowed to sell them for a profit over what they bought them for. Otherwise, they owe the dealership money in return. Crazy time, folks. But if you get close enough to check out the prices on some of these new vehicles and used vehicles on these lots, you will see that not only are they now putting prices on, they're not putting prices on these, sorry. They're not putting prices on some of these, but instead they make you scan a QR code with your phone to get the price. Clever. But also, this is replacing the employee. Think about it. You ever go to a car dealership, car lot? I know I have. And I've tried to avoid the salespeople because I just don't really feel like being bothered, or I'm not even interested in buying. I just wanted to look and I don't want to be bothered. So we play this game where, I try to pretend like I didn't notice them, and then they're trying to pretend like, they made a mistake and went down the wrong aisle, and they're just trying to make their way towards me to try to have this conversation and opening and introduce themselves and break the ice to try to get me to buy one of their cars. Well, instead, the dealerships could get rid of these employees, and they could capture more potential customers by making them scan these QR codes and getting their information. Think about it. So now you got to scan these QR codes with your phone to get the price. But also the QR code is likely storing your information and then tracking you for retargeting and marketing sales pitch purposes and geo advertising or geocaching advertising. One or the other. But at the end of the day, this is not an exclusive problem isolated to Ford or GM or any one manufacturer, really. They have to make this choice. They have to decide. Do they let profits go? Do they sell more vehicles to get more customers long term? Now, let me exclude one manufacturer from this list, Porsche. Now, you guys know my affection for Porsche, but also maybe let's consider Lamborghini, Ferrari, Bugatti. But if we're thinking about more of a commonplace daily vehicle, luxury, exotic sort of, Porsche would kind of fall into that category. Granted, you can go out and buy a Porsche Macan base for probably 50 or 60 grand. It's not an exotic, but you could also go out and try to secure yourself a new GT3 RS 992, which would definitely fall into the exotic car category if you ask me. But Porsche, outside of Lamborghini and Ferrari, although Ferrari just introduced their new Parasangue, which is their entry or introduction into the crossover game at a price tag double that of the Lamborghini Urus, crazy. Porsche is more of the common brand. But Porsche has actually released information and announcements that because they have record profits for 2021 and 2022 and plans on pushing profits higher on their road to 20 is what they're calling it, aiming to pull in 20% margin on Porsche sales. However, the exception will lie within the used and pre-owned markets, as those are dealer specific and don't fall under the Porsche brand sales and revenues. And I can tell you guys from personal experience in my local market and from browsing Auto Trader that pre-owned is sitting longer and prices are fluctuating and only going to get worse, in my opinion, purely my opinion, for the dealerships sitting on this overpriced inventory at what will be the last straw for some dealerships. I got my eye on a really nice 718 GTS 4-liter naturally aspirated flat six here in Destin. I've been watching it for a while, but I remember when it showed up and it was pre-owned and the asking price was around 110,000, I think, maybe a little bit more. And, it was missing the upgraded headlights and it also lacked the certified pre-owned warranty. And I felt like at the time they were asking one hell of a premium for that car. Well, here we are more like 5 months later, and the car is still sitting on the lot. And they've actually lowered the price by about 10 grand. And now I think that they've actually missed the boat, and they're going to have to lower the price even more. Just my opinion, just my 2 cents. But the pre-owned market and these cars sitting longer and seeing prices come down is going to ultimately hurt the dealerships. Things are only going to get worse for them as from a standpoint of the consumer and lending. Interest rates are continuously going up. Banks are pulling back. They are somewhat being more cautious and pessimistic of the future and possible defaults and bad debts and liquidity crisis. And so, folks, in my opinion, it's only going to get worse. And for the dealerships that are sitting on this overpriced inventory, they are about to, possibly face their demise. And at the worst time ever, as we are in what is considered the Christmas time for new and used car dealerships, with tax return season rolling out checks and enabling buyers to plop down huge chunks of cash for down payments and purchases. But that doesn't seem to be the case this year. And let me add that it is a sad state of affairs, folks, to think that the average car buyer doesn't have any money, any cash, any resources, liquidity available to purchase a new or used car or truck without getting a tax refund from the IRS once a year. I mean, think about that. However, we are at a pivotal crossroads and prices are on the rise, despite everything that I just told you. And that is what is most important to consumers: the price, affordability. But equally important to the dealerships hoping to sell these cars is the demand. And that is what is not on the rise. While a lot of dealerships are betting the farm and risking it all, so to speak, by going out and hitting up auctions and taking in trades to try and fill up their lots for tax season, and over the next 3 months hoping to make the lion's share of their money for the entire year, it's not looking so good. And it doesn't seem to be working out too well for them. And there are a few reasons behind it, and it does not look good for the dealerships who don't know what's happening, don't have a plan, or just plain old don't care, and are blinded by image and clout, and not focusing on what matters most: sales, revenue, cash flow, and most importantly, profitability. One of the biggest culprits hurting dealerships right now is how much they are paying for cars to put on their lots, specifically from auctions and getting bent over by MMR, or misrepresented MMR pricing, which is a tool that will help dealers find pricing on vehicles that interest them most, but is also operated by Manheim Auto Auction or Cox Automotive. So there is obviously going to be a bias to some degree. Kind of like how Auto Trader lists Kelley Blue Book values on their listings. It's hard not to have a bias depending on their motives and objectives. But according to auto dealership insiders, MMR has jumped 18% over the last few days. And that is insane when you think that these prices are going to get passed along to the potential and would-be buyers browsing these used car dealerships lots. Let's read some comments from the consumers, folks. I just tried to buy a $23,000 Wrangler Rubicon XR in Northern California today. MSRP was $66K. Dealer offered $1,500 off. Credit union offered 5.75%. I ran all the numbers with $20,000 down, and the cost was still $800 a month for 72 months. I passed. I will keep waiting to see where this train goes. Easy. Dealers are acting like there's a shortage in 0% rates. Prices are way too high, and they would rather keep the car for 120 days than negotiate. That's the crazy part, folks, is that the dealers are unwilling to accept defeat, possible loss, and continue down this road, down this path of potentially greater loss, all due to spite in the name of profitability. But at some point, you'll reach that crossroads, that deciding point in time of diminishing returns. Talk to 4 dealers on a similar car, and none of them will negotiate off sticker and fluffing in dealer fees that are BS. All 4 dealers have the cars for 90 to 180 day seats. Yep, visited a local non-franchise dealer in November, told him I'll buy it if he strikes out the $6,000 market adjustment that was just baked into the list price. And he said, we have 15 other people looking at it and maybe we're not the right dealer for you. All right, I mean, if you got 15 other people looking at it, what does that matter when you have one person buying it? Anyway, I looked around for an X6M GLE 63S and an RSQ8. Some dealers have them listed at $160K. Then financing is at 8% with excellent credit. Prices need to come down significantly with those interest rate numbers. I live in Miami. This is crazy, folks. And I mean, honestly, I think the Audi RSQ8 is an amazing vehicle. It looks phenomenal. It's probably crazy fast, but the asking price that I've seen on them is a little bit ridiculous. And I'm not the only one who has this opinion. I would assume that based on what we have seen, what's being shared, the actual facts, the truth, where banks are getting 30% less credit applications than they did last year, and some are all the way up to 60% less credit applications. The market is definitely cooling down, and it is definitely slowing down. Therefore, if a potential buyer walks the lot for one of these higher priced vehicles, odds are they're probably going to be paying cash, where I have told you guys before, cash is king. But the dealerships are not going to necessarily really be interested in dealing with them because the cash buyer is going to want the best deal. But the dealership knows that they're not going to make the most money because they're not incorporating the added finance fees on top of the already jacked up higher price. And thus there will be a butting of heads where the dealership will basically tell the potential cash buyer to walk because they would rather sit on the vehicle longer and potentially make more, but ultimately probably lose even more the longer they wait and the longer they incur these monthly carrying costs instead of actually making the sale, continuously producing cash flow, and actually making smarter buying decisions in the future on their replenished inventory. But folks, then you may ask yourself, despite the market cooling down and, sales slowing down, why are these dealerships still charging so much for these cars and trucks? Well, we are at essentially the last call, the last chance, the last push for dealers to sell their overpriced inventory. And instead of being strategic about it and lowering margins or even potentially taking small losses, instead, these knuckleheads are going to continue to beat their heads against the wall and ignore the warning signs and voices of the consumers overall, and that being the message that they are sending loud and clear is that they are just not interested in buying, and the prices are too high, and so are the interest rates. Plus, they don't have the money either. Meanwhile, stupid car dealers are sitting on inventory for over 200 days, as you can see when browsing through Car Gurus, and they are continuing to buy up more inventory and overpay for new inventory while being too hard-headed to negotiate and let cars go that they are upside down in now. Instead, they would rather let a potential deal walk and tack on another month or two of more of their carrying costs, which is asinine, crazy, insane. But the sad part is they only need one. Just one dumb, anxious buyer who doesn't know any better to sell that overpriced car to. So be warned, folks. They are looking to stick it to buyers on the price and the financing and all the added extras that they're going to tack on in the back room. You know what I'm talking about. And it just takes that one idiot to keep enabling these dealers to continue paying over for new inventory because they know that they will eventually find the one sucker to sell it to at some point in time again in the future. Or at least they hope, if they can make it that long. But folks, this is a terrible business model and poor strategy that will be short-lived, in my opinion. Because people don't have big money that they need from their tax returns to buy these overpriced cars and trucks. Now, scrambling to pull money together to put down $20K on a down payment for a new Mercedes G-Wagon or even a Jeep Wagoneer, because those jokers are expensive, and their tax return is only $8,000. And so the customer can't afford it, and the banks don't want to take the risk on a new car that is very expensive because luxury car prices are dropping dramatically, and thus leaving them with no choice but to walk away from the deal as well. So the dealers are really positioning themselves with the help of the banks and these manufacturers and these auctions to be between a rock and a hard place. Now, it seems as though at some point there will come a time where dealers will be forced to lower prices, which is likely to happen after this last push from tax season to try and get their overpriced inventory out. And when that doesn't happen and their floor plans and flooring lines get audited by their creditors, they are not going to be looking so hot. And here's what happens. Expect to see lots of bad news and terrible headlines hitting the media outlets and YouTube videos probably in the next few months as the rubber meets the road and reality starts to sink in. Dealers with, let's say, $1 million worth of inventory on their lot are going to end up having their creditors run a book on their cars and trucks to determine what is the total value of the cars and trucks in their portfolio today. And odds are the overpriced MMR values that they overpaid for just to get these cars moving at the auctions are going to drop. And now that $1 million worth of inventory will be worth only, let's just say, $800,000, forcing the dealers to make a choice. Option number one, sell their overpriced vehicles and inventory to get their books in check. Take the loss, but get the total value of their inventory on the lots in line with their creditor's valuation to continue operating in business. Or the second option, door number two, they would have to pay down the deficit. Ultimately, the difference between the $800,000 valuation and the $1 million inventory or credit utilization. And so in this case, if the lender, the bank, the creditor didn't trust the dealership enough to let them stay upside down, then they would request an immediate payment to pay down the deficit due on sale. And in this case, that would be about $200,000. And then the books would appear balanced. And the banks would more than likely be okay with that. Balancing the risk, okay? Mitigating their risk. And this is something that a lot of dealerships just can't afford to do. But maybe they will get lucky and tax season will bail them out. But I wouldn't put a lot of faith in that scenario if I were owners or operators or general managers of car dealerships. Nor if I were employees, because you got to think that if your dealership is upside down and is going to be pressured to liquidate their capital, their resources, similar to what we saw with Silicon Valley Bank's collapse, they're going to have to do the same. And when you sell at a loss, at a great loss, continuously in a short period of time, that leads you on the path to possible collapse and calamity, okay? Therefore, the risk would be immediately layoffs. But on a bigger scale, bigger picture would be the whole dealership just gets shut down. So I want everybody to be paying attention to what's happening here, not just as a consumer, as a customer, as a buyer, as an owner, operator, a manager, but also as an employee. And no matter what department you're in, okay? Sales, service, customer service, it doesn't matter. And folks, when the banks say that the vehicles are not worth what they were worth 60 or 90 days ago, when you bought them, they're telling these dealerships that they need to get paid now, okay? And the dealers, if they don't pay, they literally have the right to force payment or will send tow truck after tow truck to these dealers' lots and load up their cars and repossess them to get their assets and collateral back. Folks, crazy times. They will literally block the lots and take the cars. And this is happening a lot. Remember that video I shared with you earlier? Mainly with the dealerships buying overpriced cars that they can't afford just so that they could look cool with certain vehicles on their lots. But these vehicles aren't selling. They're just showing off to other dealers to say, hey, look what I've got over here. I've got 8 Range Rovers. I got 5 G-Wagons. Who cares? Who's making real money? That's the question. And these vehicles that aren't moving, that aren't selling, and most importantly, aren't making money, they're the ones that are going to lead to these dealerships' demise. So this is happening in LA, Las Vegas, Miami, and other parts of the country. So if you see cars getting towed away from the car dealerships, then you'll know why. Folks, tax returns are going down 20 to 30%, and people aren't buying cars like they used to. And the banks are going to stop lending to these dealers on paper and customers for these higher priced vehicles. So expect a hold and a waiting period of about maybe 6 months. And you got to think just how scary this really is when banks don't want to lend money. Think about that. When the banks don't want to lend money, especially when are less applicants coming in. I could see if there were a flood of applicants and applications coming in to borrow, and the banks were like, "Nah, we're good. We're going to pick the prime candidates, the most qualified applicants, the cream of the crop." But no, they're getting 30 to 60% less applications, and they're turning them down, and they're shying away from lending. That should be a clear warning sign of what we are up against, for what we are headed into. This storm, this crazy economic storm that is about to turn not only the auto industry upside down, but other markets in general, which we will cover on future videos. But the days of the long-term loans, the 130% over LTV value and zero money down on car purchases are done. All the while, prices are going up. Dealers are paying too much. Manufacturers are modifying and adjusting production to manipulate supply and demand.
General Motors said that it would be eliminating about 500 jobs, salaried jobs around the world as it looks to streamline its operations. Now we know that the company is sending out an offer letter to almost all of its salaried staff saying there will be an offer for a buyout. How many take it, how successful this is, and whether or not this keeps the company from having to initiate some type of a broader layoff, that remains to be seen.
It's going to be crazy, folks. I hope this information is helpful. I hope you guys found some value in this. I appreciate you guys making it all the way to this point in the video. Please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, comment down below. I love to know what you guys have to say. Stay tuned, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care. Bye.